The cold hit Jake Morrison's face like a slap. Even through his thick helmet, he could feel the freezing air trying to get in. The temperature reading on his suit showed -40 degrees. This moon was nothing but ice and rock, spinning around, a dead star at the edge of human space. Jake walked slowly through the empty hallways of the old research station. His heavy boots made loud sounds on the metal floor. Each step echoed in the darkness. The only light came from his helmet lamp, cutting through the black like a knife. 3 months ago, this place was full of Zarathi scientists. They were the enemy then. Smart, proud aliens who thought humans were just dumb animals. But the war was over now. The Zarathi had lost and run away, leaving everything behind. Jake's job was simple. Walk through the building, look for anything useful, make sure no one was hiding inside, then go home and write a report. Just another day of boring work. He pushed open a heavy door that led to the lower levels. The hinges creaked like old bones. Down here it was even colder. The heating system had been broken for weeks. Ice covered the walls like white paint. Jake moved his light around the empty rooms. Computer screens were dark and cracked. Papers were scattered on the floor, frozen solid. Some had alien writing on them that he could not read. The Zarathi had left in a big hurry. In one room, he found overturned tables and broken glass. In another, he saw clothes and personal items left behind. It looked like people had been living here, not just working. Jake wondered why the Zarathi had built a home so far from their main worlds. He was about to turn back when he heard something, a small sound like a whisper or a breath. Jake stopped walking and listened hard. Nothing. Maybe it was just the wind outside, but then he heard it again. Definitely not wind. Jake followed the sound down a dark hallway. His light showed more empty rooms filled with junk. At the end of the hall was a door marked with Zarathi symbols. It was slightly open. He pushed the door with his gloved hand. It moved slowly, making a grinding noise. Inside was a large room with broken pipes and twisted metal. Water had leaked everywhere and turned to ice. It looked like some kind of accident had happened here. In the corner, behind a pile of torn insulation and metal scraps, Jake saw movement. He moved closer, keeping his weapon ready. The movement stopped. Jake could hear breathing now, fast and scared. He pointed his light at the pile of junk. 2 large, dark eyes stared back at him. Jake's heart jumped. Someone was hiding there. Someone small. He lowered his weapon and held up his free hand. "It's okay," he said softly, even though he knew they probably could not understand him. The eyes blinked but did not look away. Jake could see more now. It was a child, wrapped in pieces of cloth and metal. The skin that showed was blue, but not the normal pale blue of healthy Zarathi. This was a deep, dark blue that looked wrong. The child was shaking, not just from fear, but from cold. Terrible, bone-deep cold that was slowly killing them. Jake had seen Zarathi before during the war. They were tall, proud creatures who never showed weakness. This one was different. Small, scared, and dying. He took a step closer. The child tried to move back, but there was nowhere to go. Jake could see now that it was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old in human terms. Her breathing was shallow and weak. Jake knew the rules. Any Zarathi found should be reported to command right away. They were still the enemy, even if the war was over, especially if they were hiding something. But this was just a child. A scared, freezing child who had been left behind. Jake made his choice. He took off his thermal coat, the thick outer layer that kept him warm. The cold bit into him right away, but his inner suit would keep him alive long enough. He moved slowly toward the girl, talking in a calm voice. "Hey there, little one. I'm not going to hurt you, I want to help." The girl's eyes went wide with fear. She tried to speak, but only made small, weak sounds. Jake could see her lips were almost black from the cold. He wrapped his coat around her carefully. She was so light, like holding a bird. Her skin was ice cold, even through the cloth she was wrapped in. Jake was not sure she would survive much longer. The girl looked up at him with confusion. In her eyes, Jake could see the question. Why was this human being kind to her? Her people had taught her that humans were cruel and stupid. But here was one giving up his warmth to save her life. Jake lifted her gently and held her close to share, his body heat. She was too weak to fight, too cold to be afraid anymore. Her head fell against his chest and he could feel her heart beating fast and light. "I've got you now," Jake whispered. "You're safe." He started walking back through the dark hallways, carrying the Zarathi child toward his temporary camp in the upper levels. Each step took them away from the cold death that had been waiting for her in that corner. Jake did not know her name. He did not know why she had been left behind. He did not know if saving her would get him in trouble. All he knew was that no child should die alone in the cold, no matter what planet they came from. Jake carried the small Zarathi girl up 3 levels to where he had set up camp. His arms ached, but he did not stop. Every few minutes he checked to make sure she was still breathing. Her breath made tiny clouds in the cold air. His camp was in an old office room that still had some heat from a working wall unit. It was not warm, but it was better than the freezing lower levels. Jake had rolled out his sleeping bag on the floor and set up a small cooking stove. He laid the girl down gently on his sleeping bag and wrapped her in his spare thermal blanket. She looked so small buried in all that fabric. Her dark blue skin was starting to look a little better, but she was still unconscious. Jake started his portable heater and aimed it toward the sleeping bag. Then he opened a pack of medical supplies and looked for something to help with frostbite. He found some warming gel and carefully rubbed it on her hands and feet. Her fingers were so tiny compared to his. While he worked, Jake talked to her softly. He did not know if she could hear him, but it felt right to let her know she was not alone. "My name is Jake," he said as he bandaged her feet. "I'm from Earth. That's a planet pretty far from here. It's warm there. You'd like it." The girl did not respond, but her breathing seemed a little stronger. Jake heated some water and made 2 cups of hot soup from his rations. The smell filled the small room. He was hungry, but he would wait. The girl needed food more than he did. After an hour, she began to stir. Her eyes opened slowly and looked around the room with fear. When she saw Jake sitting nearby, she tried to sit up quickly. The blanket fell away and she grabbed for something to defend herself with. No, it's okay," Jake said, holding up his hands to show he was not dangerous. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." But the girl did not understand his words. She spoke in Zarathi, her voice high and scared. Jake could not understand what she was saying, but he could hear the fear in it. She was begging him not to hurt her. Jake moved very slowly. He picked up one of the soup cups and held it out to her. The warm smell reached her nose and her stomach, made a loud, hungry sound. "Food," Jake said, pointing to the cup. "Warm food. For you." The girl stared at the cup like it might be a trick. Her people had told her that humans were cruel. They killed for fun. They ate other thinking beings. Why was this one offering her food? Jake took a sip from his own cup to show it was safe. Then he set her cup down on the floor and moved back. He did not want to scare her by getting too close. The girl watched him for a long time. Finally, hunger won over fear. She reached out quickly, grabbed the cup, and pulled it back to her chest. She smelled it first, then took a tiny sip. Her eyes went wide. It was warm and good and filled the empty hole in her stomach. She drank it fast, like someone might take it away. "Slow down," Jake said gently. "There's more where that came from." After she finished the soup, the girl looked at Jake with less fear. He was still scary because he was so big and strong, but he had given her warmth and food. Maybe he was not going to hurt her after all. Jake tried to think of ways to talk to her without words. He pointed to himself and said, "Jake," several times. Then he pointed to her and made a questioning face. The girl understood. She pointed to herself and said something in Zarathi that sounded like Zira. "Zira," Jake repeated, trying to say it the way she did. The girl nodded. Jake smiled and said her name again. "Zira. That's a pretty name." Even though she could not understand his words, Zira could hear that his voice was kind. No one had ever spoken to her with such gentleness. In Zarathi society, kindness was seen as weakness. Children were expected to be strong or they were left behind. Jake made more soup and gave it to Zira. This time she drank it slower. While she ate, Jake looked at her more carefully. She was very thin, like she had not eaten well for a long time. Her clothes were torn and dirty. She had probably been hiding and surviving on scraps for weeks. After the second cup of soup, Zira started to look sleepy. The warmth and food were making her tired, but she fought to stay awake, watching Jake with suspicious eyes. Jake understood. She was afraid to sleep because she thought he might hurt her when she was not looking. He moved his sleeping bag to the other side of the room and made a show of lying down with his back to her. He closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, but he stayed alert in case she needed help. Zira watched him for a long time. Slowly, her eyes began to close. The warmth from the heater and the full feeling in her stomach were too strong to fight. She fell asleep wrapped in Jake's thermal blanket. During the night, Jake woke up several times to check on her. Once, he found her shivering and added his jacket to her pile of blankets. Another time, he adjusted the heater when the room got too cold. In the morning, Zira woke up to the smell of more food cooking. Jake was making breakfast, humming a quiet song. When he saw her awake, he smiled and said good morning in his human language. Zira sat up slowly. She felt better than she had in months. Her skin was returning to its normal pale blue color. The terrible cold that had been killing her was gone. Jake brought her hot food and clean water. As she ate, he tried to ask her questions using simple words and gestures. How long had she been alone? Where was her family? Was she hurt anywhere else? Zira could not answer with words he would understand, but she tried to tell him with her hands and expressions. She had been alone for a long time. She was scared. She did not know where her people had gone. Jake's radio crackled to life. A voice spoke from his belt. "Morrison, this is base. What's your status? Over." Jake looked at Zira, then at his radio. He was supposed to report everything he found, but if he told them about Zira, they would take her away. They would put her in a cage and ask her mean questions. "Morrison here," he said into the radio. "Still checking the lower levels. Nothing important to report yet. Over." It was a lie, but as Jake looked at Zira's trusting face, he knew it was the right lie to tell. Jake spent 2 more days with Zira in the abandoned research station. Each day she got stronger and less afraid. She learned to say his name in her soft voice, and he learned a few words in her language. She taught him that Kila meant thank you and Vash meant friend, but Jake knew this could not last forever. On the 3rd morning, his radio crackled again. This time it was Captain Lisa Hayes, his commanding officer. "Morrison, you're taking too long out there. Command wants you. Back at base today, bring any intel you found, that's an order." Jake looked at Zira, who was sitting by the heater eating breakfast. She had grown to trust him completely. When he moved around the room, her eyes followed him like he was the most important thing in her world. "Copy that, Captain," Jake said, into the radio. "I'll be back before sunset." Zira could hear the sadness in his voice even though she did not understand the words. She tilted her head and made a questioning sound. Jake knelt down next to her. How could he explain that he had to take her to people who might hurt her? How could he make her understand that he had no choice? He tried using simple words and gestures. He pointed to himself, then to her, then toward the door. They had to go somewhere together. He tried to show her with his face that he was sorry. Zira's eyes went wide with fear. She shook her head and backed away from him. She had thought she was safe here with Jake. She had thought he would protect her forever. But Jake was patient. He sat on the floor and held out his hand to her. He spoke in his gentlest voice. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Zira. I promise. You're my friend. My Vash." The word in her own language made her stop running. Jake was trying to tell her something important. She could see in his eyes that he was sad too. Maybe he did not want to leave this place either. Slowly, she came back to him. Jake wrapped her in his thermal coat and picked her up. She was still so light, but she was much healthier. Now, her skin was the right color and her eyes were bright. The trip back to the human base took 4 hours walking across the ice. Jake carried Zira most of the way, stopping often to let her rest and to give her water and food. She stayed quiet, watching the frozen landscape with curious eyes. As they got closer to the base, Jake could see the big metal buildings and the ships landing and taking off. Zira had never seen so many human vehicles before. She pressed closer to Jake, scared by all the noise and activity. The guards at the gate stared when they saw Jake carrying a Zirathi child. One of them reached for his weapon, but Jake shook his head. "She's not dangerous," Jake said firmly. "She's just a kid." The guards let them pass, but Jake could see them talking into their radios. By the time he reached the main building, everyone would know about Zira. Captain Hayes was waiting for Jake in her office. She was a tough woman with short gray hair and hard eyes. When Jake walked in carrying Zira, her expression did not change. "Put the alien down, Morrison," she said. "Step back." Jake gently set Zira on her feet, but he stayed close to her. Zira grabbed onto his leg and hid behind him, peeking out at the scary human woman. "Sir, her name is Zira," Jake said. "She's just a child. She was left behind when the Zirathi evacuated. She's been living alone in the cold for months." "Captain." Hayes walked around her desk and looked down at Zira with cold eyes. "How do we know she's not a spy? How do we know this isn't some kind of trick?" "Look at her," Jake said. "She's 8 years old. She was dying when I found her. What kind of spy would they send as a half-frozen child?" But Captain Hayes was not convinced. She picked up her radio and called Colonel Rick Turner, the base commander. "Sir, Morrison found a Zirathi child at the research station. Request instructions." The radio crackled with static, then Colonel Turner's voice came through loud and clear. "Bring the alien to Detention Block C. I want it questioned immediately. It might have valuable information about Zirathi operations in this sector." Jake felt his stomach drop. Detention Block C was where they kept prisoners of war. It was a cold, dark place with metal cages and no comfort. "Sir," Jake said, "she doesn't know anything about military operations. She's just a scared kid who needs help." Captain Hayes looked at him with sharp eyes. "Are you questioning orders, Morrison?" Jake looked down at Zira, who was still clinging to his leg. She could not understand what they were saying, but she could feel the tension in the room. Her big eyes were full of trust as she looked up at Jake. "No, sir," Jake said quietly. "Just requesting that she be treated with care. She's been through enough." 2 security guards came to escort them to the detention block. When they tried to take Zira's hand, she screamed and held onto Jake tighter. The sound was high and scared, like a wounded animal. "It's okay," Jake told her, even though it was not okay at all. "I'll be right here, I won't leave you." But as they walked through the cold hallways of the base, Jake wondered if that was a promise he could keep. The detention block was exactly as bad as Jake had feared. The cells were small and dark, with only a thin mattress on a metal shelf. The walls were made of thick steel with tiny windows. Dr. Amy Collins, the base medic, was waiting for them. She was a kind woman with gentle hands who had joined the military to help people, not hurt them. When she saw Zira, her face filled with concern. "This child is malnourished and has been living in extreme cold," she said to the guards. "She needs medical attention, not imprisonment." But the guards had their orders. They put Zira in a cell and locked the door with a loud clang. Zira threw herself against the bars, crying Jake's name over and over. "Jake! Jake!" she called, reaching her small hands through the bars toward him. Jake knelt down next to the cell and took her hands in his. "I'm here, Zira. I won't go far. I'll come back to see you soon." But as Jake walked away from the detention block, he could still hear Zira crying his name. The sound followed him down the hallway and stayed in his mind long after he could no longer hear it. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about Zira alone in that cold cell, scared and confused. She had trusted him, and he had brought her to this place. He had followed orders like a good soldier. But for the first time in his military career, Jake wondered if being a good soldier was the same as being a good person. Jake could not stay away from the detention block. The next morning, he asked Captain Hayes for permission to visit Zira. "She might tell us useful information if she trusts me," he said. It was partly true, but mostly Jake just needed to see that she was okay. Captain Hayes agreed, but she sent a guard to watch them. When Jake entered the detention area, his heart sank. Zira was sitting in the corner of her cell, wrapped in a thin blanket. She had not eaten the food they brought her. Her eyes looked empty and sad. But when she saw Jake, her whole face changed. She jumped up and ran to the bars, reaching for him, through the metal. "Jake," she said, and started speaking fast in Zirathi. Even though he could not understand the words, Jake could hear the relief and happiness in her voice. Jake knelt down by the cell and took her small hands in his big ones. "I'm here, Zira. I'm sorry I had to bring you to this place." The guard watching them looked bored. He could not understand Zirathi, so he did not care what the child was saying. Over the next few days, Jake visited Zira every morning and evening. Slowly, she began to eat again and talk more. Jake brought her paper and pencils, and she drew pictures for him. Most of them showed the two of them together at the research station. During these visits, Zira began to tell Jake about her life. She used simple words, gestures, and pictures to help him understand. Her home world was called Xeris Prime. It was a cold place where only the strong survived. Zira had been born smaller and gentler than other Zirathi children. Her parents thought she was weak and shameful. When she was 6 years old, they sent her away to live with her uncle, a scientist who worked at research stations far from home. Her uncle was kinder than her parents, but he was often too busy with his work to pay attention to her. 3 months ago, there had been an accident at the research station. Pipes had burst and filled the lower levels with poisonous gas. Zira's uncle had pushed her into a safe room and locked the door to protect her, but he had breathed too much of the bad air and died. When the evacuation order came, no one remembered that there was a child hiding in the lower levels. They all left, in a hurry, thinking everyone was accounted for. Zira had been alone for weeks, eating scraps of food and trying to stay warm. She was slowly dying when Jake found her. As Jake learned more about Zira's story, he felt angry at the people who had abandoned her, but he also felt sad for her. She had never known real love or kindness until he showed it to her. Dr. Collins visited Zira too and was worried about her condition. "She's not just physically sick," the doctor told Jake privately. "She's giving up hope. Children can die from that." Jake knew Dr. Collins was right. Each day, Zira seemed a little more distant. She was starting to believe that this cold cell was all she deserved. Then came the news that made everything worse. Colonel Turner called Jake to his office. The colonel was a hard man who cared more about following rules than about people. "Morrison," the colonel said, "I've received orders from Sector Command. The alien child is to be transferred to the military research facility on Station Beta 7. They want to study her brain patterns and genetic structure." Jake felt ice in his stomach. He had heard about Station Beta 7. It was where they did experiments on enemy prisoners. Most of the subjects did not survive. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "she's just a child. She doesn't know any military secrets. What could they possibly learn from her?" Colonel Turner looked at Jake with cold eyes. "That's not for you to decide, Lieutenant. The transport ship arrives tomorrow. Make sure the subject is ready for transfer." Jake left the colonel's office feeling sick. He went straight to Dr. Collins and told her what was happening. Dr. Collins turned pale. "They can't do that. She's a non-combatant. There are laws against experimenting on children, even enemy children." "Try telling that to Colonel Turner," Jake said bitterly. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about Zira's trusting face and the way she said his name. He had promised to protect her, but he was about to let them take her to a place where she would suffer and die. At 2 a.m, Jake made his decision. He got dressed and went to find Dr. Collins. She was still awake in her medical office, reading through law books and military regulations. "There has to be something we can do," she said when she saw Jake. "Some rule or law that protects her." Jake sat down across from her desk. "Maybe there is, but it won't stop them from taking her tomorrow." Dr. Collins looked at him carefully. "What are you thinking, Jake?" Jake took a deep breath. "I'm thinking that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules." Dr. Collins was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" They made their plan quickly. In the morning, Jake was scheduled to take Zira to the transport ship. Dr. Collins would create a medical emergency that required Jake to take a different route. Instead of going to the landing pad, they would go to the vehicle depot. Dr. Collins had friends among the civilian aid workers who helped war refugees. If they could get Zira to the settlement on the other side of the moon, she might have a chance at a real life. It was dangerous. If they got caught, Jake would face court-martial and prison. Dr. Collins would lose her medical license, but they both knew they could not live with themselves if they let Zira be taken to Station Beta 7. The next morning came too soon. Jake put on his uniform and tried to look normal. His hands shook a little as he walked to the detention block. When Zira saw him, she smiled and ran to the bars as always. But something in Jake's face made her stop smiling. She could see that he was scared and worried. "Vash?" she asked softly, using her word for friend. Jake knelt down and took her hands through the bars. "We're going on a trip, Zira, but it might be scary. Do you trust me?" Zira looked into his eyes and nodded without hesitation. She did not understand what was happening, but she trusted Jake completely. The guard unlocked the cell and handed Jake a pair of restraints. "Colonel's orders. The subject needs to be secured for transport." Jake looked at the metal cuffs that were meant for Zira's small wrists. They were cold and hard, made for adult prisoners. "She's 8 years old," Jake said. "She's not going to run away." But the guard insisted. Jake had to put the restraints on Zira's wrists, making them as loose as possible. She looked up at him with confused and hurt eyes. "It's just for a little while," Jake whispered to her. "I promise I'll take them off soon." As they walked through the base toward what everyone thought was the transport ship, Jake's heart pounded. In a few minutes, he would either save Zira's life or destroy his own career. But when he looked down at her small, trusting face, Jake knew he was making the right choice. Jake and Zira were halfway to the landing pad when Dr. Collins came running up to them, looking panicked. "Jake, thank goodness I found you," she said loudly enough for the guard following them to hear. "We have a medical emergency in Section 7. There's been an accident with the heating system. 3 people have severe frostbite and I need your help carrying them to the medical bay." The guard looked confused. "But Lieutenant Morrison has orders to escort the prisoner to transport." Dr. Collins turned to the guard with authority in her voice. "Soldier, those people will die if we don't get them medical attention right now. The transport can wait 10 minutes. Jake pretended to think about it. "The doctor's right. We can't let people die. The transport pilot will understand." They changed direction toward the vehicle depot, which was near Section 7. The guard followed them, still looking uncertain about the change in plans. At the depot, Dr. Collins pointed to a large medical transport vehicle. "We'll need the big ambulance to carry all the injured people." Jake helped Zira into the back of the vehicle, while Dr. Collins distracted the guard with medical talk. Once they were inside, Jake quietly removed the restraints from Zira's wrists and threw them under a seat. "Where are we going?" Zira asked in her mixed language of Zarathi and human words. "Somewhere safe," Jake promised her. Dr. Collins climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The guard waved them away, still believing they were going to help injured people. Instead, Dr. Collins drove toward the main exit of the base. Jake sat in the back with Zira, trying to look calm even though his heart was racing. At the gate, the guard stopped them for a routine check. One of them looked in the back and saw Jake with Zira. "Why is the prisoner still with you, Lieutenant?" Jake had prepared for this question. "Doctor's orders. The alien child has medical knowledge that might help treat the injured people. She's coming with us as a consultant." It was a weak excuse, but the guard was in a hurry and waved them through. Once they were outside the base, Dr. Collins drove fast across the frozen landscape. The civilian settlement was on the other side of the moon, a 3-hour drive through dangerous ice fields. Zira pressed her face to the window, watching the white world go by. She had never been this far from buildings before. The endless ice was beautiful and scary at the same time. "Jake," she said, "are we running away?" Jake looked into her bright eyes and decided to tell her the truth. "Yes, Zira, we're running away. The people at the base wanted to send you to a bad place where they would hurt you. I couldn't let that happen." Zira was quiet for a moment thinking about this. Then she reached over and took Jake's big hand in both of her small ones. "You saved me again," she said in her careful human words. The civilian settlement was built inside a series of connected domes that kept out the cold. It housed refugees from many different worlds who had lost their homes during the war. Helen Price, the settlement coordinator, met them at the entrance. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who had dedicated her life to helping people in need. Dr. Collins quickly explained the situation. Helen listened without judgment, then knelt down to Zira's level. "Hello, little one," Helen said gently. "Welcome to New Haven. Would you like something warm to eat?" Zira looked to Jake for permission. When he nodded, she followed Helen inside. The settlement was amazing. The main dome was like a small city with gardens, shops, and homes. Children from different alien species played together in the streets. Adults from various worlds worked side by side, building a new community. For the first time in her life, Zira saw what the galaxy could be like when different species chose to help each other instead of fight. Helen found them a small apartment where Jake and Zira could rest. But their peace did not last long. Within hours, military vehicles surrounded the settlement. Colonel Turner himself had come with a squad of soldiers to take Zira back. The colonel's voice echoed through speakers mounted on his vehicle. "This is Colonel Turner of the Earth Military Command. We know you're harboring a fugitive alien. Send out Lieutenant Morrison and the prisoner immediately, and no one will be harmed." Instead of hiding, Helen Price walked out to meet the soldiers. Behind her came dozens of settlement residents, humans, Zirathi, Altarians, and other species all standing together. Jake came out too, with Zira holding his hand. She was scared, but she stayed close to him. "Colonel," Helen said firmly, "this child has requested sanctuary under Section 12 of the Galactic Refugee Protection Act. We cannot legally hand her over without a proper hearing." Colonel Turner's face turned red with anger. "That law doesn't apply to enemy combatants." "She's 8 years old," Dr. Collins said, stepping forward. "Look at her. Does she look like a combatant to you?" More and more settlement residents gathered around them. They formed a protective circle around Jake and Zira, showing that they would not let the soldiers take her without a fight. Zira looked around at all these people, strangers who were willing to protect her. No one in her entire life had ever stood up for her like this. She felt something warm and strong growing in her chest. She let go of Jake's hand and stepped forward. "Wait," she said in her small voice. Everyone turned to look at her. Zira was scared, but she had something important to say. She had been practicing human words for weeks, and now she needed to use them. "Colonel Turner," she said carefully, "I am not soldier. I am not spy. I am just little girl who was lost and cold. Jake Morrison found me and gave me food and warmth. He showed me that not all humans are cruel like my people told me." She pointed to the crowd of people protecting her. "These people don't even know me, but they stand here to keep me safe. They show me that being different doesn't mean being enemies." Zira's voice grew stronger as she continued. "My uncle taught me that the strongest people are those who protect the weak ones. Jake is strong. These people are strong. But not because they have big weapons or loud voices. They are strong because they choose kindness over fear." The settlement fell quiet. Even some of Colonel Turner's soldiers looked uncomfortable. Zira turned to Jake and smiled. "You taught me that being small doesn't mean being worthless. You gave me warmth when I was cold. You gave me faith when I was lost. You showed me what it means to be truly strong." Before anyone could respond, another vehicle arrived at the settlement. This one carried Admiral Kate Ross, the sector commander who was Colonel Turner's boss. Admiral Ross had been monitoring the situation and had come to see it for herself. She was a veteran officer who had fought in many wars, but she also believed in doing what was right. She listened as Helen Price explained the situation. She looked at Zira, small and brave in the circle of protectors. She saw Jake, a good soldier who had risked everything to save a child. Finally, Admiral Ross spoke to Colonel Turner. "Colonel, your orders are rescinded. This child will remain at the settlement under refugee protection." Lieutenant Morrison's actions showed exactly the kind of humanity we've been fighting to preserve. Colonel Turner started to argue, but Admiral Ross cut him off. "The war is over, Colonel. It's time we started acting like it." As the military vehicles drove away, the settlement erupted in celebration. People hugged Jake and welcomed Zira as their newest resident. That evening, as Jake prepared to return to his duties, Zira gave him a small crystal pendant. It was pale blue like her skin and carved with symbols that meant family of the heart. "In my culture," she explained, "we give these only to the people we love most. You are my family now, Jake. My real family." Jake knelt down and hugged her tightly. "And you're mine too, Zira." In the months that followed, Zira thrived at New Haven. She learned to speak perfect human standard and helped other refugee children adjust to their new lives. She became known throughout the settlement for her kindness and wisdom. Jake visited often, and their friendship became a symbol of hope for better relations between humans and Zirathi. Other Zirathi refugees began to arrive at New Haven, drawn by stories of the human who had saved one of their children. One day, as Jake watched Zira teaching a group of mixed-species children how to play a Zirathi game, she ran over to him with a big smile. "Jake," she said, "I want to tell you something important." "What's that, little Vash?" Zira looked up at him with eyes full of love and gratitude. "Thank you for showing me that the universe is not cold and dark. Thank you for teaching me that there are people who choose love over fear, warmth over coldness, and hope over despair." Jake smiled and ruffled her hair, which had grown longer and healthier since her arrival at the settlement. "Thank you for teaching me the same thing, Zira." As the sun set over the icy landscape outside, Jake realized that, in saving Zira, he had also saved something important in himself. He had learned that true strength came not from following orders blindly, but from following his heart when it told him what was right. And somewhere in the warmth of the settlement, surrounded by friends who had become family, a little Zirathi, girl who had once been dying in the cold, was now helping to build a better future for everyone.